We are constantly fighting a battle with our technology. Sometimes we feel like technology just opens so many doors that we love it and we cannot imagine living without it. But other times we feel powerless to just stop scrolling. We have a love-hate relationship with technology. So how can we navigate this new technology that keeps getting more and more pervasive in our lives and make wise choices with it, putting it in its proper place, while also recognizing some of the great opportunities and doors that are open through technology? Well, today's episode is going to go into how to digitally declutter your life. And we're going to look at 4 main steps: reflecting on it, limiting it, curating it, and replacing it. I hope you'll join me. Welcome to a More Beautiful Life Collective podcast. We know that in the hectic hurry of everyday life, it's easy to lose sight of what really matters. This is a moment to pause and realign your focus on the one who gives us peace and rest. We're focusing on discipleship, productivity, and homemaking as we live with eternity in mind. This is the place where you'll learn to create a life you love and cultivate your heart for God. I'm Casey Fletcher. Thanks so much for joining me. Everyone, this is episode 36 of season 1 of a More Beautiful Life Collective podcast. And what we're going to be talking about today is this idea of digitally decluttering your life. Now, if you've been following the podcast for any length of time, you know that one of the things that I really like to talk about is technology. And a part of the reason why is because I actually really love technology. It's one of those things that I felt like I was born, with a computer in my hand. We always had the latest consoles. I didn't have a phone throughout high school, but, as soon as I got one, I was on the social media apps and all those things. But then I always felt like I kind of had this tension. I had some limitations in place where I had to have a life outside of screens where, our younger kids may not have that today. But then at the same time, I love technology. I was pretty tech savvy. And even now, it's like I'm making a blog, having a podcast, trying to do more and more things with tech. And so you have to really figure out where you want your relationship with technology to be. Now, if you've been following along to the podcast, you know that episode 3 of the podcast talks about whether technology is a Lord of your life. And we look at what the Bible says about technology, some of these principles that we can gather about how to relate to screens. And then in episode 4 of the podcast, we talked about should you go no screens. So some of the benefits from living a no or low screen lifestyle. And we looked at that particularly with our kids. I also, back in around November, I did a social media fast. So I quit social media and I was off of it for all of December and most of January. And I might talk about why I did that in another podcast and some of the things that I learned from trying to do more of a no or low screens lifestyle, especially by quitting social media. And now I'm trying to find this balance. I'm back on social media and I recognize some of the benefits of that, especially if you have, a platform like a podcast or something like that. You want to have the ability to share it. But then again, knowing this, you also have to figure out how far you're going to let that technology go. You say, okay, well, I want to use this thing because I recognize that it gets my message out there. You can post a podcast about an idea that before it was really hard to get people to understand what that thing is. And now, there are some podcasts and some YouTube videos and things that they're posted and they have hundreds of thousands of views. And it just gives your platform such a better influence on the world as a whole. But at the same time, we recognize that it's almost like this thing of you're selling your soul, right? So you recognize the benefits of technology, but you don't want to sacrifice yourself or your family or your soul for the benefits that you get from it. So you have to learn how to put it in its proper place. Now, one of the things that I think about with this is especially thinking about my relationship to technology, but I also think about it with my son. So one of the things that we're going through, it's almost every day now. So for a while in November, we limited screens all week. And so we would do a Friday movie night and we would have pizza, and that would be the only time that we would watch screens throughout the week. And I did that for about a month, but then, it kind of creeps back in, and there's reasons why. And again, I might do another podcast on that another day, but we've been doing now is, we might do a screens, half an hour in the afternoons right after they do like their nap time or their quiet time, just so I can get dinner going and things like that. And now every morning there's this like battle where my son is like, oh, I want to watch Paw Patrol, or I want to watch this other show, or I want to watch this show. And it becomes this thing of, even though, we try to set these boundaries on our time, it kind of creeps back in. And part of it is just because he's, constantly asking, like saying, oh, I want to do this. I want to do this. And so we have to learn how to set a firm boundary so that he can expect it. But I think we need to do the same thing for ourselves, where we may say, oh, I have this predetermined thing of, I'm not going to use this app, or I'm not going to do this thing on technology, or really anything that we do in life. And so we feel like we need to set this boundary for ourselves. But then there's this other part of our mind that's constantly asking, saying, oh, I want to do this thing. Can I do this thing? And we have our willpower worn down by these parts in our bodies that are saying, hey, no, I want to do this thing. And so it reminds me of that verse, I think it's in Romans, that says, there are things that I want to do that I do not do, but the things that I do not want to do, those are the things that I want to do. And so I think as we look at technology, we always need to be asking ourselves, what is the best use of this tool? Because I think that technology is the perfect example of how we are redeeming our time. Technology can easily suck away and drain away all of our time. It can ruin our lives, ruin our relationships, but not in the way of some other like sins. It's not like, alcoholism or something else like that, where it really has come between you and God maybe, or maybe it's torn apart your relationships. I think with technology, it's not that it's necessarily going to destroy your relationships or make you have a divorce or something like that. Instead, it's going to be something that just slowly kind of puts a wedge in between you and the best version of your life. So again, it's not something that is going to lead you down a path where you're going to be in a terrible situation. It's not going to lead you down a path where you're going to hit rock bottom, but you may be led down this path if you are constantly just going with the flow of culture and how culture relates to screens, where you're going to look back at the end of your days, or maybe whenever your kids leave the house or something like that, and you might be like, well, where did the time go? I always think about this, and I mentioned this picture before, but I always think of it as, whenever we talk about screens, it's almost like we have sand in our fingers and it just kind of flows through. And that's the way our time feels. And we don't know why we can't hold on to it, but it's because we are so divided amongst all the things that are going on in life. With the information and apps and things like that. And so what we are going to be talking about today is how to redeem that time, to put technology in its proper place and make sure that we are using it well. Part of this is just looking at different habits that can help us to have a good rule of life. So the last episode we talked about journaling, and I think journaling is a great way to be mindful and purposeful with some of the goals and intentions that we have in our life. And then I think having a proper use of technology is also a good habit that everyone should really try to have in their life. So what we're going to be doing today is looking at how we put technology in its proper place. And the term I'm going to use for this is digitally decluttering your life. With digital decluttering, if you've followed any kind of podcast or anything like that, that's talked about decluttering, you know that decluttering, what you're doing is you're going through everything in your home and you're putting it in its proper place. You're making sure that you actually want to keep that thing. So you're assessing whether or not it is something that is worth the time it takes to take care of that thing. And then if you do decide you want to keep that thing, you say, okay, this is its new home and it's not going to go outside of that. So you don't need to have, 20,000 pins strewn across your house. Instead, you have a place for your pins. You decide which pins you want to keep, and then it has its designated place. And then you don't go buy any new pins until you use the pins that you have. Same thing with toys. We always have, and I've heard this, and this is a good idea. We always have the toys go from my son's room, which is where most of the toys stay, and it kind of gets strewn into the living room and all of the kitchen and our bedroom. And so one thing that we do is we try to say, okay, no toys stay in the living room. Now they might get into the living room, like if we're hanging out in there, especially if it's a rainy day, we might be in the living room. But by the end of the day or the end of the week, whenever we do our big cleanup, they always go back to his room, and it just keeps things tidy. So he has a designated place and that's the boundary. And we try to limit all of the toys and things like that into his room. Now, another idea with decluttering is this idea of curation. So you're choosing the best. Now, you don't need to keep every single toy that you've ever received, just like you don't need to keep every pin that you own. Instead, you pick the best and get rid of the rest. And so these ideas of decluttering, I think, are really helpful whenever we talk about technology, because again, it's this idea of assessing what you want so that you can put boundaries on your technology use. One thing that I have done is created a 30 days of digital decluttering checklist. And so you can find that on the link in the show notes. You can also find a series of shorts videos that walks you through this process on YouTube. So you can look at those, and then that will walk you through the process of 30 days of saying, okay, how am I going to digitally declutter my life? Now, what we're going to talk about in this episode is some of the overarching principles that go into those 30 days of digital decluttering. Currently, there's a trend in society where more and more people are getting mindful of screens. There is a new push called Wait Until 8 that's saying, okay, at least wait until your children are 8 before giving them a phone. There's the Arrow box that is, he has a podcast, and he also created this box where during dinner time, you put your phone in the box and then it locks it down so that you can't get it out. There is another guy who he has created this tech-free social club on college campuses that during that time, basically they're trying to harken back to the 80s and 90s where there weren't phones. And so that way you have this kind of digitally free landscape to make relationships. The 1000 Hours Outside podcast also goes into this. So there's this big push now to limit screens, especially for our children. And this is why I think it's important to kind of bring up this idea. I think I was listening to a homeschool mom who was talking about, different curriculums and things. And one thing that she said is with her oldest child, her oldest was coming up right around that time where almost every kid had a phone. It was weird if they didn't have a phone. And so she got her child a phone whenever she was real young, and they just kind of didn't even think about it. It was just how everybody was treating phones, especially for young kids. And so now she says, yes, we did that whenever she was younger, but we're not going to do that with our younger kids, because whenever you know better, you do better. And I think about this with us as well. We want to make sure our kids are taken care of, that they have the best, and that they have a good relationship with technology. We want to set them up. I always think our time with our kids in our home is we're trying to set them up so that they're able to launch well. But I think about with us as adults, we also, if we know better, we do better. So if we know that smoking is really bad for our health, we say, we're going to do better. We're not going to smoke. If we know that something that it's not good for your health to sit around and not, have that 30 minutes of exercise every day, well, then we need to add some movement in. And yeah, that can be difficult depending on your season of life. But if you know better, you do better. And I think now we know the way that technology affects us. And so we need to do better. And I think this is something that it's easy to fall back into these patterns. Just like for me with my son, we were doing really well of saying we're not going to have any screens, but then it started to creep back in. But if I know better, I need to do better. And that might take some time where I have to detox and then reset and then, see how that goes. It's a journey. It's not just a one-time action that you can do where it's going to be solved forever. Just like your health and wellness is a journey. It's not something that you do one time. But I think with us in technology, I think it's important that we're always recognizing that we're on this journey, just like our kids are on this journey, where we're learning how to deal with screens. So like I said, what we're going to do today is talk about 4 steps to digitally declutter your life. Smartphone makers, they are constantly, their whole goal is that they want you to have your eyes on the screen as much as possible. That's what they're being paid the big bucks to make sure happens. And so if you are not, if you have a smartphone app and you're not enticed to be on it, they feel like they failed. They want you to be addicted to your screens, and they're being made in order to appeal to those elements of yourself. One person was saying that basically what they've done is they've taken the same physical reactions in your mind, your physiological reactions, and they've tried to, that come with gambling, and they've tried to put that in your phone, so that your phone, every time you pick it up, it's almost like that thing of gambling, except you're not gambling with money, you're gambling with a social response. Like, ooh, what might I get this time? And so you have this idea of scrolling where every time you don't know what's going to pop up, but something loads and pops up, and that kind of releases that same thing of like, you're basically, again, it's that idea of gambling where you're like, it's a risk, and you get to see what you win whenever you post something, or even whenever you like scroll up to get more information. And so the question becomes, we have these forces in our life that are pushing us to be on screens more. But at the same time, we recognize that screens can be really good for our message, for our influence on other people, for our influence on the kingdom of God, for making us better, husbands and wives, and better homemakers, better parents, because of the things that we can listen to and learn. I've learned so much throughout the years from the podcasts that I listen to and from the different things that I've studied and I've researched. And it has made me into the person that I am. So I think there are a lot of good things. We have to question ourselves and ask the question and answer it. What habits should I put in place so that I can use technology well? And so digital decluttering, like I said, is this process of putting technology in its proper place, where we work through these value judgments of what is worth keeping and what is not worth keeping. What limits should I have based on my current usage? What are problem and pain points? I always like to say pain points and shame points for me, so that we can make our lives something that redeems our time, where we're not just wasting it by the endless scroll. So the first step that you need to follow whenever you are digitally decluttering is you want to reflect. And basically, this is just assessing your current technological habits, as well as asking yourself why you are using certain things as far as technology goes. So I think there's a few truths that we need to remember about our devices. First truth, like I said before, devices they're designed to capture our attention, and they're designed to be very addictive. We can think of them kind of like cigarettes and vapes, where people who are making these things, they're designing them for a purpose. And again, it's not necessarily something with our health, though I guess you could say, us sitting around all the time, that does affect our health. And there's other things too. But it's something that is affecting our brains, where our brains get addicted to it, and then it messes up our mental health. But unlike other drugs, that like cigarettes and vapes, now people know that these are not necessarily good things that people are doing, but they recognize, okay, well, they're addicted to them, so they need to kind of overcome that thing. With technology, it's just seen as pervasive. It's benign. I think sometimes now we recognize that some kids can get addicted to it, but we really just see it as, we see it as a tool, but it's addictive. And so we have to figure out how to navigate that. I think it's also important to remind ourselves that every time that we go to a device, we're looking for something. We're kind of looking for some kind of release or some kind of input into our life. We're addicted to these things because we get something out of them. And so we grow dependent on those habits. And because of what we are searching and trying to get from those things. One lady I was listening to, she said that she went to a detox program, and what she did is she had like a little notebook in her back pocket. That's what they recommended to do. And so instead of reaching for your phone, you would have that notebook. And what they said to do is every time you try to reach for that notebook, again, which is a replacement for your phone, you should write down what you were trying to do or what you were doing at that moment to try to get you to analyze those habits of what you were trying to get from your phone. What she recognizes is that she would do that whenever she was having small talk. Like that was kind of like her way of like hiding from the small talk. But I think that can be helpful, if you are really struggling with the pickups on your phone. They say the average American adult picks up their phone 150 times a day. Some people even pick it up 300 times a day. So again, it's not something that, that is a lot. That we spend that much time on our phones, and we're spending, 3 to 4 hours on our phone each day throughout all of those different pickups. And so recognizing why you are reaching for your phone each time will help you to curb some of those habits. Also, it's important to recognize that people who developed apps and other devices, they don't care about you as a person. Facebook, obviously you are a commodity to them, but it's not like Facebook really cares about you. It's just this mindless corporation. And so they want, instead of a product that they're selling where they've created, like with a car manufacturer, a car is their product. And so they want to make sure their car is good enough to sell to the economy and have other people buy it, right? But with you are the product. You are the commodity. Your data is what they're trying to get. And so again, they get more data every time that you interact with the algorithm so that they can figure out what you like, what keeps your eyes on the screen, so then they can sell that data to other people. And so you just have to remember that these people, it's not that they care about you, it's that they're trying to keep your eyes on the screen. So they're trying to steal your time away. We're in an attention economy, and what they're doing is they're buying your attention. They're trying to keep your attention. And so whenever you're giving that to them, it seems like you're getting something for free, but what you're really doing is you're sacrificing, you're paying with your time. So all the things that you could have done in that time are taken away from you. Another side, and I had not really thought about this before until there was a book that was just released about this topic. But another side of this attention economy is, one, you have these apps, and phones and things like that, where they get your data and they sell that. So you could think of the big tech corporations. But what the big tech corporations are doing, and I don't think this is it just kind of happened. I don't think that the tech corporations created these people. I think it just kind of happened. And now this is just the way this economy works. But you also have the influencers. And so whenever you're thinking about the influencers, the people, they desire your attention, but they don't want your data from you. They want your eyes so that their influence grows, right? And so influence, it's not necessarily bad. And the person who had the book, what she was talking about is that basically she was just painting it as influence is always bad. I don't necessarily think that it is, because we're always going to be influenced. That's just the way humans are, that we're always influenced in a certain way. In years past, you had the mob mentality. And so that was something that I think everybody just has this, we're all sheep, right? And so we're all led to whatever the leader is going. And obviously we want to be sheep that follow Christ. But what I thought was interesting is the way that she painted our technology use as an avenue for influencers to lead us in a certain way. And to me, it was like, oh, wow, like thinking about that in connection with the fact that we really want our influence, the people to be influencing us. We want our primary influence to be Christ, right? But then all of these secondary and tertiary influences, we want them to be godly people who are leading us towards that lifestyle, to love and good works, right? And so I think of the way that our apps are telling us to behave. They're telling us all sorts of things, and they're trying to influence us in ways. But again, the influencers, a lot of times you have to think about their message, what they're trying to get you to do. And I was listening to some random video that was geared more towards teen girls and maybe younger college girls. And a lot of it was just like the products that they were using and, these different things that it was nothing meaningful. They just wanted you to be a good consumer. And this was just a random influencer, right? But you need to think about what the people you're listening to and what the people that you're watching, the people that you follow on social media, where are they influencing you? Where are they leading you? Because they're leading you somewhere. Mama Bear Apologetics, it's a Reformed tradition podcast that's mainly for moms. But one of the things that they do is they try to bring in discernment to try to figure out these cultural shifts, like what is godly, what is not godly, how can we think through these things. So they have a acronym called ROAR, because it's Mama Bear, so it's ROAR, that helps you to realize the messaging that people are trying to present whenever you come across these things in culture. And their acronym is, you want to first recognize the message. Then you want to offer discernment. So again, affirm the good, reject the bad, argue for a healthier approach, and then reinforce through discussion, discipleship, and prayer. And honestly, we've done that before here on the podcast, where we've looked at not necessarily specific people, but we've looked at certain things and we said, okay, what does the culture say? What is good? What is not good? What is biblical? What is not biblical? How can we be in this sphere, whether it's looking at our money or looking at technology or looking at any of these things, planning, anything like that. And how can we have a biblical approach to these things? How can we move forward in a biblical way? What I think is interesting with this is that you need to do this with really anybody that you're following. You need to recognize what they're telling you. Then you need to figure out what's good about their message and what's not good about their message. You need to argue for a healthier approach to that person or brand or company. And then you need to reinforce through discussion, discipleship, and prayer. So kind of bring in your community. So you could think about this, Taylor Swift just released her new album. So looking at people like that, like, is what she is talking about, this idea of revenge and, kind of boy craziness and all this kind of stuff, is this really the idol that you want for your kids? I don't know. But what you need to do is recognize that is influencing you. If they are one of the primary people that you follow and that you love and worship and adore, they're going to be influencing you towards a certain way. So we want our technology use to influence us towards Christ. So whenever you're assessing all of these things, let's boil down these points to 3 main questions, which are, 1, how much technology am I using? So do like a little survey, figure out how much you're on your phone or your TV or whatever. 2, what types of technology, so apps, devices, am I using? And you could also ask yourself, why are you using those things? Then 3, what am I being influenced by? And what am I being influenced to do? So are your influencers desiring you to feel a certain way? Do they want you to buy a certain thing, to support a certain political party? And then that way you can assess, like, okay, is this really a godly good thing for me to follow? Or am I just being led down this path and I just don't even realize that this is what's happening? So I think it's helpful as you go through this, you can journal about your technology use and try to figure out what is good and what is bad about it. So once you've done all of that, the next thing that you need to do is you need to place boundaries. You need to limit your technology use. So whenever you do this, you really need to rely on what you figured out in the first step. So everybody's different. I think women kind of fall into the more Facebook and Instagram, social media camp. And then you have men who are more like YouTube and Twitter. But that's not always the case, but that's what I've seen, especially among some of the younger guys that I talk to, where everybody is getting something different, but everybody has the propensity to be addicted to something with technology because it's so pervasive. So it could be that you're trying to get this emotional connection. It could be that you're trying to get information, or, you could have some kind of entertainment or escape, which could be social media, could be YouTube, or it could be a video game. So I think as you look at all this, then you can figure out where you need to place boundaries, because everybody will need slightly different boundaries based on their current usage. Whenever we talk about boundaries, I always think of this verse from Psalm 16, 5-6, and I just love this verse. And I think it describes boundaries in a biblical way, but in such a beautiful way, because I think a lot of times we don't like this idea of being limited. So Psalms 16, 5-6 says, Lord, you alone are my portion and my cup. You make my lot secure. The boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Surely I have a delightful inheritance. I will praise the Lord who counsels me. Even at night, my heart instructs me. I keep my eyes always on the Lord. With him at my right hand, I will not be shaken. And I think to me, that's such a beautiful picture. The context of this obviously is that they're talking about their boundary lines in the promised land. So they go into the promised land, cast lots, everybody gets their boundary lines. And one of the things that, is like even on like Jubilee years, like if for some reason your boundary lines have moved, a lot of times they get moved back. And so this idea of this like continual inheritance and portion that's given to you is something that you can trust in, that this is something that will be there. It's almost unchanging. And I think about this too. We have this inheritance, our boundary lines are the kingdom and the fact that we have received this inheritance from God through Christ. And so to me, the idea of our boundary lines is beautiful. And I also think about this, in Christian culture, we recognize this, but I think a lot of people outside of it can feel like, oh, well, don't you guys just care about all these rules that you can't do? And in Christian culture, we recognize, well, our boundary lines have fallen in pleasant places. Yes, they're boundaries. Yes, there are things that we shouldn't go over, but these things are good things. I think boundaries can help us to be content in our present place where we aren't filled with envy for looking at something that we're not supposed to be in. And it's always this reminder of our portion and our inheritance, as opposed to like in America where you're like, oh, I bought all this land myself because I worked hard or something like that. Instead, it was God gave them their inheritance, or, your parents, because you received it years ago, you have this home place that you have been gifted down that you didn't earn. God just gave it to you. So I think all of these things are beautiful. And I think we can think about the boundaries we place in our lives as our portion, where God has said there are things that you shouldn't step outside of, but it is so much better inside these boundary lines. And so whenever it comes to technology, there are things that we shouldn't step outside of, but we can rest in the comfort of the boundary markers that we have. So as we look at this, I think placing limits or boundaries, basically we are practicing a form of, self-denial, self-control, fasting, where we are saying, even though I could have all of these things, I'm choosing not to because it's not beneficial for me. And so whenever we put these boundary markers in place, we can rest more securely in the life that we've chosen. So I think some of the boundary markers that you could put on your life could be that you're not going to check work-related emails, texts, phone calls, whatever, after a certain time. So it could be after you get home, it could be like from work, or it could be maybe after, you clean up the kitchen at night. It could be that you're going to set aside certain blocks in the day where you limit those things. It could be that you're not going to look at your phone at the dinner table. It could be that you're not going to look at your phone until after you read scripture in the morning and have your quiet time. It could be that you're not going to look at any screens after 8 p.m. so that you can read, journal, spend time with your family, with your spouse. And it could be also that you're saying, hey, I'm not going to be on a device like scrolling or whatever. I know it's hard with work because a lot of times with work, you're on devices too, which is just a reason why you should limit other entertainment from screens. But saying, oh, I'm going to try to limit my scrolling or whatever to, 1 or 2 hours or something like that, which is actually hard to do. I've done that before and it's hard. Those pickups add up real quick. So again, all of these things are focused on limiting behaviors. All of them are focused on the things that you are not going to do. But I think it's very beneficial to place these limits on your lives because again, I think when we do that, we end up having a more pleasant rest within those boundary lines. Now, step 3 is once you've done that, then you can imagine like, okay, you've got your little fence, your little boundary lines of the things you are not going to do. Then what do you do with the space in the actual, in this analogy, a field or the technology that you are keeping? This is where you need to curate what you have. You need to keep the best and get rid of the rest. This is like our decluttering anthem. Keep the best, get rid of the rest. So basically, you could choose the best things about technology to keep. And then the rest of the stuff you get rid of. You don't even use, that's junk food. It's not good. It's clutter. You get rid of it. And so I think it's helpful to just quickly make a list of the things that you actually appreciate about technology. Because again, it's not necessarily that we're saying everything about technology is bad. I think certain things are really good. So what are the things that you think are good? Because I think a lot of times the bad crowds out the good because we can't even do the good because our attention is so consumed with the bad. So some of the things that I love about technology, I love being able to do grocery pickup with 2 young kids. I'd stopped doing it for a while and we had like 2 meltdowns in 2 weeks at the grocery store. I was like, okay, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not going back to going in the store yet. Maybe when they're older. I love, getting packages on Amazon, being able to get exactly what people want, especially for registries and things like that. Listening to so many amazing podcasts. I have a list on the blog about just, good Christian living podcast that you can listen to that can encourage you to live for God every day. And you can find that on the blog. But I have learned and grown so much from all of these podcasts. I love being able to connect with like-minded believers and friends and family on social media, just kind of keeping up with their life. And I love doing this. I love being able to write out my thoughts and record them and post them to hopefully help you guys live for God in your everyday. I love doing a pizza and movie night every Friday night. That becomes, it's my son's favorite night of the week because we get to have pizza and then we get to watch, whatever movies. I love some of the old Disney movies that came out, whenever I was a kid. And then some of maybe the older ones, thinking about Indiana Jones is a little bit, stressful, but some of those old movies that are really good, but you just don't think about watching them. It's just better. But the thing about all of these show the importance of curation, where, for instance, with family movie night, like sometimes our relationship with shows is we're constantly just watching, I call them the dregs of YouTube, where, if your son or daughter are interested in a certain topic, like you'll put it on. So thinking about like trucks, tractors, that was like my son's favorite thing as a kid. And so you start watching these things and the algorithm shows you something else. And by the end, you're watching this like weird thing where they're speaking another language. And so I think that is like the dregs of YouTube. And, Jurassic Park, my son is just now getting into dinosaurs. Jurassic Park, there's a lot of messages and things that are deep and thoughtful, and there's a lot of scary parts too. So you have to use discretion whenever you show it to your kids. But Jurassic Park is a lot different than some, random Play-Doh dinosaur that you watch on YouTube. And the thing is you can crowd out time watching movies that get you thinking about what it means to be a creator. And then also, like, if you're just watching that Play-Doh thing, there's no thoughts. There's nothing that is going on there. So I just think that's a good example where podcasts, same thing. Like you could crowd out your time with either crappy podcast about random, people's thoughts about something that are not very good and doesn't spur you on to live for God. You can crowd out your time listening to crappy podcasts, or you could crowd out your time listening to the news. If you listen to 5 or 6 news stations, there's one that they release like a 30-minute news show every day. And if you do that, that could easily take up all your podcast time. Or you could crowd it out with music. Same thing, I think music can be beautiful. It can spur you on to worship. But if all your music is crap, then you're not going to be spurred on to anything. And those will be the lyrics and things that you'll think of in the middle of the night. They're going to be the things that are guiding you, are changing you. I can still remember some of the stuff that I listened to back whenever I was in high school, and it's not necessarily good things, but there are things where I know every single word, and it's been 15 years because that's just what I poured into my life. And so now that's what I've memorized. And again, wouldn't it be better if I was singing to myself, hymns and other things like that, and those rich words of truth, rather than singing, Panic at the Disco or whatever I used to listen to back in the day. So I just think that it's important to recognize that you're pouring into yourself regardless. So pour in good things into your life. Curation should affect your social media feed. It should affect your YouTube algorithm, your recommended videos, your Spotify playlist, podcast subscriptions, Netflix's what should I watch next? It can affect the types of things that you're subscribed to. There are some, we had several video subscriptions, and then we realized, probably some of these we don't really like. We don't really care about where that company is going or the types of shows that they're producing. So we canceled it. So, it starts to affect more and more of what you're listening to, what you're watching, what you're reading. And so curation, again, the question you're asking yourself is, what are these people influencing me to do? I don't think that you should exist in an echo chamber, but I think many of us, it's not that we're existing in an echo chamber. We're just watching whatever holds, think of the deer in the headlights, whatever holds our attention the most on our phones, which again could be something that we don't even care about, but it's just something that we look at it and then we read the comments and then we're stuck on it. And instead we want to curate the best things that spur us on, not just the things that holds our attention. All right. And then last step 4 is we want to replace. So once you've done all this, if you've reflected on your technology use, limited it, curated it, the next step is just to replace the time that you would be spending on screens with something not on screens. So obviously, if you're curating screen time, like you're still going to have screen time. You're still going to have time to listen to podcasts, read blogs, get emails, all that kind of stuff. But you also want to replace it. One of the terms that I've heard used, I think is becoming a little bit more popular, is basically like you have your screen time, and then you also have this time that you want to fill with embodied activity. So basically, these are things that you do in your physical body where you're not off in this unreal world of screens. Instead, you're doing something with your hands, doing something that is active, or doing something where you're creating something. So things like this could be, going for a walk outside, spending time with family, having those kind of conversations, cooking, baking, painting, sewing, crafting, any of those things, woodworking, gardening. All of these things get you out of your head and they produce something. I think that's the best thing that you can do is whenever you are doing this embodied activity, you are connecting with somebody or connecting with nature, and then you're doing something that ultimately produces something that you can see the results. Which, again, if you do all of that, that's like the anti-screen, right? Because on our screens, a lot of times we don't connect with anybody face-to-face. We're very much in our head. And then there's nothing of value at the end. And so we don't get kind of that dopamine rush from producing something. So I think that is something that we need to also emphasize, is that whenever we're putting technology in its proper place, doing that will free up time. Whenever I did the social media fast, recognize that I'm kind of lonely. You start to realize how much time that you spend on screens each day, where you're feeling like you're spending time with people, but you're not really. And so I was like, I need to go do some play dates. I need to go hang out with people, because if you're all at home all day by yourself, if you're a stay-at-home mom or something like that, you don't really have all those people there. And so that's where you start to realize that limiting your technology usage, it'll open up your mind to, I want to create something. I want to see something that's beautiful. I want to spend time outside. I want to produce something that's valuable. And so then you'll search for other ways. But again, they're embodied ways. They're not ways that you get that kind of release from a screen. So today, what we have talked about is our digital decluttering checklist. So we went through 4 steps where we reflect on our technology use, we limit it, curate it, and then replace it with other things. If you would like to get a step-by-step 30 days of digital decluttering, you can check out the YouTube short series by looking at the channel, and you can subscribe to that so you can go through all of the episodes. You can also get a printout of that checklist if you check the show notes. So I hope this is interesting. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe. And you can also leave a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts, because this helps others find the show. So I hope you'll join us next week. Until then, keep creating a life you love and cultivating your heart for God. Bye. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of a More Beautiful Life Collective podcast. If you haven't yet, please leave a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts to help others find the show. While you're there, you can like and subscribe so that you never miss an episode. Don't forget to check out the blog and our store for more encouragement and resources on how to create a life you love and cultivate your heart for God. I'm Casey Fletcher, and I'll see you next week.